Okay, so we were just talking about what development is. So let me just recap. So we define development as the process of improving the quality of all human lives and capabilities by raising people's levels of living, self-esteem, and freedom. And then there are these additional factors that occur along with economic development, right? So usually growth is a must. You need to raise income levels. But then while you are doing that, by the transition to modern growth, you see urbanization, you see transition of resources, transfer of resources from agriculture to manufacturing and services. You see demographic transition, families getting smaller, life expectancy is getting higher and higher, right? Then we have democratic transitions, the rise of freedoms overall, okay? International trade, education, health, and these are not just the entire story, of course. There are other issues as well. But that's the typical definition of development, all right? Now, this is an interesting thing from your textbook. Uh, the experience of poverty, voices of the poor. So just look at these statements. Let's say we are looking at a blind woman from Tiraspol, Moldova. For a poor person, everything is terrible. Illness, humiliation, shame. We are cripples. We are afraid of everything. We depend on everyone. No one needs us. We are like garbage that everyone wants to get rid of. Okay? Of course, this is a terrible thing. I mean, that statement itself is, heartbreaking, right? Look at the young man in Nishimishi, Zambia. When food was in abundance, relatives used to share it. These days of hunger, however, not even relatives would help you by giving you some food. Okay? So food problem is still a huge issue, a huge global issue, threatening many lives all across the world. And last thing, let's say we look at poor men in Kenya. Don't ask me what poverty is, because you have met it outside my house. Look at the house and count the number of holes. Look at the utensils and the clothes I am wearing. Look at everything and write what you see. What you see is poverty. So this is actually true. So in the last couple of years, I visited some poor countries around the world. One is Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast in Africa. The other is Morocco. I also visited some rural parts of Jakarta, Indonesia. So uh, this last statement is actually illuminating, because you don't need to be a development economist or an expert just to understand what poverty is. So you observe it, all right? For instance, in many household surveys that particularly addresses poverty issues, one thing that you look at is the material that you used uh, in home in the floor. Okay, what is that material? Is it some sort of concrete? Is it some sort of uh, land, soil? I mean, or there are some other materials that you use to cover the floor of your house. So that itself is an important indicator. And the other is the heating source. How do you heat? How do you warm your house? Okay, what is the source of energy there? Do you have, for instance, a refrigerator or an air conditioner? So these are the things that somehow signal what poverty is, what type of clothing you are wearing. Uh, and in some other domains, sometimes you just look at the age of the people, whether that particular person is disabled or not, and long-term illnesses, etc. So those are the things that sometimes uh, describe poverty with much success. All right. So I want you to read the textbook just to see, for the first part in the introduction, just to see, sorry, sorry. So this part is actually interesting in your textbook. So just take a look. Now, developing countries are, of course, presently characterized by low levels of income, right? Most of them are located in Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, uh, MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, Latin America, Eastern Europe, and the former Soviet Union. Okay? And then we also have, of course, developed countries. They are now economically advanced capitalist nations, right? So in Western Europe, in North America, in Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. So these are the regions and the countries that are now developed. Now, as you know, in traditional economics, we think about efficiency, right? And equilibrium. So we want to allocate resources efficiently all across the economy. And according to the neoclassical foundations, this can be achieved if people, if households maximize their utilities, if firms maximize their profits, under no market imperfections, government does not need to intervene in the economy, and then market itself goes to equilibrium and it becomes an efficient equilibrium, right? Pareto efficiency. Remember that story. So this is the traditional view. So if you want to understand development using this traditional view, you of course design theories using these fundamentals, and I'm going to discuss some of these, traditional theories. But then there is also one interesting thing that is called political economy. So in your textbook, it is described as an attempt to merge economic analysis with practical politics. In other words, to view economic activity in its political context. So politics is basically about power. Okay? Who holds de facto and de jure powers? All right? So that's the critical thing. So if you are poorer, or if you are absolutely poor, then you have you don't have much economic power, right? Then that also translates into political power as well, because in most countries, poorer people are underrepresented. Disabled people, people without jobs, okay, people living in extreme conditions. Most of the time, their voices are not heard. So if you want to define development economics, there's a nice definition of text, to the study of how economies are transformed from stagnation to growth. The one thing that I earlier described, right, in terms of England, in the British experience, we see stagnation for long centuries and transition to modern growth. So that's one thing we want to understand by development economics. And also, through this transition, how low-income countries become high-income countries, okay? And what are the causes and consequences of course, poverty? Because if you understand if you truly understand the causes of poverty, then you might be successful in coming up with policy responses, right? Correct, effective policy responses. So that's the key. So if you look at the historical, experience, of course, you may say that humanity as a whole is not very successful in that respect. Okay, because around half of the people in the world, or at least 1/3 of the people across the world, are still poor in absolute standard. Okay. So in your text, there is also a set of critical questions posed in the introduction. I listed them here. So we start with, of course, the real meaning of development, because again, there are traditional views and modern views. The long run economic history of today's developed countries is important as we discussed. Economic institutions, the extreme divergence of incomes and growth rates between the rich and the poor, cross-country differences in growth rates, and in that regard, what are the sources of growth? Okay. Then what are the theories of development? What are the global and local challenges? Okay. What are the, what is the role and status of women? Causes of extreme poverty, and what are the effective policies to alleviate that would alleviate this extreme poverty? Okay. The role of population growth, nutrition and health, underemployment, rural-urban differences, public health, role of education systems, which is a huge issue right now. Even in developed countries, what is the best education system is a very good question now. Okay, because poverty is not the problem of the third world in particular. So if you go to a metropole in North America or Western Europe, you can still see relatively poorer households and people. Okay, so understanding their conditions is also important as well. Then we have agricultural development, environmental sustainability, the role of free markets and privatization, poor development policies, the role of international trade. Is it good or bad? Right? Restrictions on international trade, exchange rate controls, trade wars. Okay? More generally, what is the effect of globalization? All right? So, comparative advantage, one of the familiar concepts, right? So, is the exports of agricultural goods and natural resources always good for a poor economy? Right? Because according to the comparative advantage theories, their comparative advantages in these natural resources and agricultural goods, but is it always good for them to specialize in these commodities, right? So we also have foreign debt problems, foreign aid problems, because some economists argue that foreign aid is useful for poor countries. Some economists argue that foreign aid is not useful given the institutional constraints. Imagine that there's corruption there. So even if you give the foreign aid, that aid does not translate into development success. Okay? We also have multinational corporations, financial and fiscal policies, and microfinance, lastly. Okay? Let me give you an assignment right there. So just learn today what microfinance is. Okay? So let me continue with the traditional versus the modern views. Okay? So in the traditional view, development is seen as growth. Okay? You look at GDP. If GDP is growing, then you are good to go. Of course, this is so naive, right? Because there are some rich countries in the world, on average, where women cannot drive cars. Okay? So you must think broadly here. Okay? Development is much more broader than growth. But if you naively think that development is growth, then you want to focus one thing, for instance, savings and investment. Okay? Poor countries are poor because there is not enough saving. Then there must be some process that lead this economy to save more and then invest more. With higher investment, there will be faster capital accumulation. Faster capital accumulation means higher incomes, etc., right? So then you add to this the population policy, lower population growth through restricting fertility. Okay, because if you have limited productive capacity, then one thing you can do is to limit the number of people that will share that capacity, right? So lower population growth is a policy option there if you are naive. Then you also suggest trade liberalization, okay, opening up to international trade because you want to benefit from comparative advantage, which is not wrong per se, but you must be careful in understanding the historical processes there. I will discuss this later on. Then what are the sources of growth? Usually there are two broad sources: capital accumulation and productivity growth. And in most of these traditional views, productivity growth is seen as exogenous. Okay, something happening there, and for some reason you are benefiting from it. In some traditional theories, development is seen as successive stages that follow each other. Okay? First there's poverty, then there's some uh, uh, necessary stage to take place. Then you save more, invest more. Then you become a manufacturing society. Then you become a mass consumption society, etc. So we're gonna discuss these theories. Then there is also developed as structural change because resources are transferred from agriculture to manufacturing. Then we also have dependency theories. Some of these are neo-Marxian theories. Okay, they argue that poor countries are poor because global forces, colonial forces, actually keep them poor. All right, because poor countries are dependent on these global factors. Then there's duality theories. There's false paradigm theories in that regard as well. And then there is also theories that suggest poor countries are poor because government is doing too much. Government intervenes too much, and government is not necessarily effective. Government distorts efficiency principles. Because of this, there's poverty. All right. So these are traditional views. But then there is also modern views. All right. And one important paradigm in this regard is Amartya Sen's approach. Development as freedom. Okay. That approach underlines the importance of capabilities and functions. In a moment, I will show you these. All right. And there are some values, humane values. All right. There are some objectives in life. What is good life? That's an important question. Okay. Then there is also a separate literature that understands development as happiness. Okay, felicity. All right, the real welfare of people. What factors do determine the real welfare, the real felicity, happiness of people? So there is also this view. In modern theories, we look at coordination failures. Okay, so game theory is involved here. Okay, because different agents in the society take different decisions, and they sometimes base their decisions upon the expectation of what others should behave. Okay, and then sometimes there is a coordination problem. There are also multiple equilibria. In the traditional economics, there is always one equilibrium, which is efficient. All right? If you introduce different elements, different realistic elements to the story in the modern theories, you see sometimes multiple equilibria. So one equilibria is good for, one equilibria decreases poverty. The other equilibria, let's say, keeps poverty as it there. All right? So then the question becomes how the society choose between equilibria. Is it history that determines equilibrium selection, or is it expectations? Okay. There are also other views that sees development as self-discovery, because initially you don't have much information. You don't know much useful knowledge, and you don't know where to invest, how to invest. Okay. That also creates some coordination problems. And also there's another view which is called growth diagnostics. We will cover that as well under the heading of modern approaches. All right. So modern views, new views, introduce more realistic elements to the traditional growth theories, traditional development theories, so we can understand more diverse experiences of the third world, basically. Okay. Now, let me quickly discuss Amartya Sen's approach and finalize today's lecture. So Amartya Sen's approach basically defines two important things. One is called capability, the other is called functioning. All right. Now, capability is defined here. So it is the freedoms that people have given their personal features and command over commodities. All right. So if you have, let's say, some money on your pocket, in your pocket, all right, and then if you have some preferences over commodities, then you can go to the market and purchase these commodities. This is your freedom. So you are capable of purchasing those commodities. So then after purchasing those commodities, you have your command over these commodities. You can consume them, you can distribute them to poor people, or you can trash them. Okay? So capability is this, but don't think only in terms of commodities. Sometimes services are important. And some other capabilities, as we will discuss now, so there are some things, some personal attributes and some society-wide or community-wide attributes that affect your capabilities. Okay, that determine whether you are capable or not. All right. Now, functioning is different. Functioning is what people do or can do with commodities that they come to possess or control. All right. So if you consume those goods that you purchased from the market, then this is for your own benefit. But sometimes you care about others and you can share some of the things that you have with others in your community, others in your family, others in your city. All right? So functioning is the secondary aspect. So first you must be capable. After, if you are capable, if you have the commodities, then those commodities or services you have some functionings, and those functionings depend on again some characteristics. So what are these things? Amartya Sen underlines 5 different categories. All right, 5 different categories that explain the disparity between income and actual case. All right, so you might have income, you might be rich, but you may not be still enjoying those capabilities and functionings. All right, so what are these reasons? First, some of them are personal. You are rich but disabled. You are rich but chronically ill. You are rich but you are very old. You are rich but you are a woman. All right? Those are personal characteristics that limit your capabilities. Okay? Environmental issues. From country to the country and within a country, from region to region, heating and clothing requirements differ. Air pollution differs. Disease environment is sometimes largely different, right? Compare, for instance, Congo with, let's say, I don't know, Greece. Okay? In Congo, because of geography, the disease environment is terrible. There is still malaria there. Okay? In Greece, climate is much more, milder. So social issues, crime, violence, trust, and more generally, the foundations of social capital, those also can differ for different people within a country or people living in different countries. Okay? You may be rich, but if you are living in a community that is extremely violent, then you may not be enjoying all the capabilities and functionings. All right? One other thing is familial. All right? So, what is the decision mechanism within the household? Okay? How does a household's resources get distributed among the members of the family? All right? And right there, gender issue is so important. Okay? If you look at gender studies, you see this issue of household level decision making. Okay? And some of this is related with, of course, domestic violence that men exercised against women. All right? And finally, there are relational perspectives. Relational means that as a member of your society, you interact with other members in your community, in your region. Okay? Then there, conventions, customs, norms, and behavioral practices become very important. Okay? There are many traditions and cultural practices that limit the welfare and happiness of people. All right? We're going to see some of these issues. I mean, you open news, global news, and you hear these voices all the time. You hear these stories all the time. Okay? One particular type of shoe, worn by Asian cultures, for instance, limit the bone development of girls. Okay? In Africa, a particular type of necklace, just to create a longer neck for women, actually create health problems for these women. All right? And sometimes the bequest law, all right? Some types of bequest law in countries leave all the bequests to the eldest son, all right? Not the other siblings. So the entire agricultural property of one family is basically left to the eldest son, all right? So there are many other conventions, customs, and norms that limit the capabilities and functions of people in different countries and different regions. All right? So Amartya Sen's approach then underlines whether people are free and whether people are capable of using their resources. Are these resources shared equally? Are the decision mechanisms democratic? Are the traditional views and customs and norms limiting the capability and freedom of people? For instance, in countries governed by Islamic law, women face serious limitations in their welfare. Okay? So all these things matter, and in the traditional theories, we don't see that richness. Okay? So in modern views, especially with the Amartya Sen's capability approach, we understand the core values, all right, of development. So what are these core values? First, sustenance, which means you must have sufficient income to cover food, shelter, clothing, etc. Okay? The second thing is self-esteem. So it is not just about material conditions. It is also about your aspirations, your expectations, your dignity. All right? The question is whether the society you live in support your self-esteem, your dignity, your integrity, expectation, whether the society respects you as an individual with all your peculiarities, with all your discrepancies and idiosyncrasies. Okay? Finally, freedom. So freedom is different than self-esteem. Okay? Freedom is the third core value because, as we discussed just a moment ago, Amartya Sen's approach requires freedom. Okay? So if a society, if members of a society do not feel free and or are not free, then there is a problem there because then you cannot choose. All right? The entire idea of neoclassical economics is based on choice, right? So if you are not free to choose, then there is a problem there. If you are not free to express yourself, express your characteristics, then there is a problem there. So core values of development are then necessities of life. So you must have sufficient income, and then a respectful, dignified life that's supports your self-esteem, and then a life, a society, an economy, a policy set that support your freedoms, civil freedoms, economic freedoms, etc., etc. Okay. So finally, objectives of development could be, of course, related with the core values. We have objectives, right? One is to increase the availability of these resources. Okay. The second is raising the levels of living, higher incomes, more jobs, better education, greater attention to cultural and human values. All right. Otherwise, the life is not so great. Just imagine yourself living in a Gulf country with huge incomes originating from, crude oil, but terrible situation in terms of self-esteem and freedoms. Okay, and finally, we want to increase the range of social and economic choices people need to make. All right, so let's look at this. So, social choices and economic choices available to individuals and nations by freeing them from servitude and dependence, not only in relation to other people and nation states, but also to the forces of ignorance and human misery. Okay, so violence, again, crime, so physical security matters, right? Physical safety matters. Food safety, for instance. Food safety is a huge issue in many countries. All right, and the last, the COVID-19 pandemic has this important issue, has this important aspect concerning with, concern with food safety. All right. So we want to increase freedoms more generally then. Okay. All right. So that's all for today. And we have less than 3 minutes to conclude. Of course, if you want to ask questions and continue discussion, we can start another session. Let me now stop here and give you the floor for your questions and comments. There's one comment in chat. Oh, evet. Okay, I'm waiting for your inputs in the remaining 2 minutes. If there's not enough, we can start another session to discuss your questions and comments.
May I ask question in Turkish?
Okay, go ahead. It is not preferred, but I'm letting you be free. So increase your freedom here to ask your question.
Bu ders genel olarak ekonomik development üzerine ilerleyecek ama aynı zamanda development'ın diğer aspektlerini de göreceğiz, öyle mi?
Evet.
Tamam. Bunu merak ettim işte.
İyi, bunu sorabilirdin canım İngilizce. Sen de artık biraz kendine güven.
Tamam.
Ben
Bir
de
dahakine.
çok böyle philosophical, çok derin şeyler anlatacaksın diye düşündüm. Tamam, burayı keserim istersen videoda.
Fark etmez mi?
İyi, dursun o zaman.
Hocam ben de bir şey anlatabilir miyim?
Anlat Serap,
Daha doğrusu
ama bir dakikan var. Bir dakika yeter mi? Geri bağlanalım mı?
Yetmez. Ya şeyi anlatacaktım. Ben daha önce Sri Lanka'ya gitmiştim de oradaki fakirlikten kastımız hani neler gördüğümden bahsedecektim ve
O zaman
gerçekten benim için çok kötüydü mesela.
Bunu haftaya biraz hazırlıklı gelip anlatır mısın? Bir 5 dakika bize dersten önce.
Tabii ki anlatabilirim.
Tamam. Başka yurt dışı deneyimleri olan da varsa yoksul ülkelerden haftaya öyle bir 10-15 dakika introduction discussion yapalım. Tamam. Ben size biraz işte Ivory Coast'u ve şeyi anlatırım. Fas'ı anlatırım. Okay then. Please read Comparative Economic Development, all right, from the textbook. Comparative Economic Development, and next week again we meet at Monday. We meet on Monday at 9 a.m. All right.